Donald Trump's political style has always been defined by sharp swings, emotional outbursts, and sudden recalibrations, and his latest episode involving India has once again reinforced this unpredictable pattern. What began as a fiery denunciation, shared in his trademark blunt tone, quickly transformed into a softer stance only hours later, leaving analysts, supporters, and critics scrambling to make sense of yet another Trumpian reversal. The moment encapsulates not only the former president's unique brand of politics, but also the complicated dynamics of U.S.-India relations, which have long been shaped by trade, strategic interests, and personal diplomacy. Trump's India flip-flop, from rage to retreat, stands as a symbolic reminder of how personality-driven politics can reshape foreign policy narratives within the span of a single day. The episode unfolded with characteristic drama. Trump, never one to mince words, lashed out at India in a post that was laced with anger, frustration, and thinly veiled threats. He accused Indian leadership of taking advantage of the United States, of failing to uphold fair trade principles, and of undermining American interests on the global stage. The tone of the message was unmistakably hostile, drawing from the same well of populist resentment he has used against China, the European Union, and even NATO allies in the past. By placing India in the crosshairs, Trump seemed to be signaling that no partner was beyond reproach, and that his version of America First diplomacy would not tolerate perceived slights or imbalances, no matter how strategically valuable the relationship might be. Almost immediately, the post generated a wave of reactions. Commentators across the political spectrum seized on the outburst, with some noting that India had long been treated as a strategic counterweight to China and a key partner in the Indo-Pacific. Why then, critics asked, would Trump risk alienating such an important ally? Supporters, on the other hand, applauded his bluntness, arguing that the United States had for decades tolerated unfair trade practices from friends and foes alike, and that Trump's willingness to call it like it is represented a refreshing honesty. Within hours, however, the narrative shifted dramatically. Trump softened his stance, issuing remarks that praised India's importance as a partner and expressing admiration for the Indian people. He even went so far as to highlight shared democratic values and the long-standing friendship between the two nations, walking back the confrontational tone he had used only earlier in the day. For seasoned observers of Trump's behavior, the reversal was unsurprising. This was not the first time he had delivered a bombastic critique only to retreat into conciliatory language once the political costs became apparent. The speed of the flip-flop, however, was striking even by his standards. Within a single news cycle, India had gone from villain to valued partner, and Trump had once again demonstrated his capacity to dominate headlines through volatility. The question, of course, was why? What explains the rage in the first place, and what compelled the rapid retreat? The answers lie in the intersection of domestic politics, personal ego, and the delicate balancing act of international diplomacy. Trump's anger at India can be traced back to long-standing grievances about trade imbalances. During his presidency, he frequently criticized countries that ran trade surpluses with the United States, accusing them of exploiting American workers and industries. India was no exception. He often highlighted the high tariffs India imposed on American goods, especially in sectors like agriculture, technology, and motorcycles, a point he famously raised when complaining about tariffs on Harley-Davidson bikes. For Trump, whose political brand has been built on appealing to blue-collar workers and presenting himself as a champion of American manufacturing, such imbalances represented an easy target. By lashing out at India, he was reviving a familiar theme, that America was being cheated, and that only his tough stance could restore fairness. The rage, however, was not purely about economics. Trump's political strategy has always relied on keeping himself at the center of attention, and foreign policy controversies provide ample opportunity to dominate the news cycle. By attacking India, he ensured coverage that went beyond the usual domestic squabbles and tapped into global intrigue. At a time when he faces legal challenges, intra-party competition, and questions about his electability, creating a distraction with a bold foreign policy statement serves his tactical needs. Anger becomes not just an emotion, but a deliberate tool, wielded to command headlines and reinforce his image as a fighter unwilling to bow to diplomatic niceties. And yet, for all his bluster, Trump is not immune to political calculation. The retreat that followed his angry post was likely motivated by several converging factors. First, India is not an adversary like China or Iran, but a partner that many in Washington, including within Trump's own party, consider essential for balancing Beijing's growing power. Alienating India risks undermining the very Indo-Pacific strategy the United States has been cultivating for years. It also risks alienating Indian American voters, a demographic that, while not overwhelmingly Republican, has become increasingly significant in battleground states. Trump has, in the past, sought to woo this community by highlighting his personal rapport with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, famously sharing the stage with him at the Howdy Modi rally in Houston. To sustain that image, a full-throated attack on India would be politically unwise. Second, Trump thrives on relationships with strongman leaders, and Modi fits that mold. Both men share a populist style, a flair for spectacle, and a willingness to defy global institutions in favor of nationalist rhetoric. To sustain that sense of camaraderie, Trump needed to recalibrate quickly once his outburst began drawing negative attention. The retreat allowed him to preserve the narrative of friendship without appearing entirely inconsistent, though, of course, the inconsistency was obvious to anyone paying attention. Finally, Trump's reversal reflects his instinctive reliance on gut feelings rather than structured policy frameworks. Unlike traditional politicians who carefully script their messaging, Trump operates through impulse. He often speaks first and recalibrates later, creating a cycle of outrage and retreat that has become his hallmark. The India episode is merely the latest in a long line of such episodes, from his threats to withdraw from NATO to his sudden praise for authoritarian leaders he once criticized. The unpredictability is not a bug, but a feature of his political persona, one that he leverages to keep opponents off balance and ensure constant media attention. The consequences of this flip-flop extend beyond the immediate headlines. For India, the episode is a reminder of the volatility of American politics, particularly when personality-driven leadership takes center stage. While Indian officials may dismiss the outburst as political theater, it nevertheless underscores the challenges of dealing with a United States that can swing from hostility to praise within hours. For U.S. allies and adversaries alike, it is a reminder that Trump, whether in office or as a political force outside of it, continues to shape global perceptions of America's reliability. Let's continue. I'll now write part 2 of the continuous article, about 1,000 more words, seamlessly picking up where part 1 left off. The rapid sequence of Trump's anger and retreat also reveals how modern politics is increasingly shaped by the immediacy of social media. In earlier eras, a foreign policy statement would have been carefully crafted, vetted through advisors, and delivered in a speech or press conference with diplomatic nuance. Trump, however, has always treated platforms like Twitter and now Truth Social as his personal megaphone, bypassing traditional filters and unleashing raw emotion in real time. The India flip-flop is emblematic of this dynamic. His initial outburst was not the product of a policy paper or a strategic briefing. It was a spontaneous declaration, reflective of his own instincts and grievances. The retreat that followed was equally impulsive, likely informed by advisors rushing to contain the fallout, media narratives shifting rapidly, and Trump's own sensitivity to how his words were being received. The spectacle of such reversals might appear chaotic, but for Trump it serves a particular function. By oscillating between confrontation and conciliation, he projects both toughness and flexibility, ensuring that he is never locked into a single narrative. To his base, the initial rage affirms that he is unafraid to stand up to anyone, even supposed allies. To the broader international community, the subsequent retreat signals that he is still open to dialogue and partnership. This duality allows him to occupy two roles at once: the disruptor who challenges the status quo, and the dealmaker, who ultimately seeks resolution. The India case perfectly illustrates how this dance plays out in practice. The Indian government's response to Trump's statements was measured, reflecting both experience and pragmatism. Indian officials have long understood Trump's rhetorical style, having navigated his unpredictable behavior during his presidency. They know that bluster does not always translate into policy, and that fiery remarks can be walked back as quickly as they are made. As such, India refrained from issuing any sharp rebuke, choosing instead to emphasize the strength of bilateral relations and the enduring ties between the two nations. By refusing to be drawn into the drama, India preserved the image of stability, while allowing Trump's words to be interpreted as political theater aimed primarily at domestic audiences. Still, beneath the surface, there are reasons for concern. Trump's criticism touched on real points of tension in U.S.-India relations, particularly regarding trade. For years, Washington and New Delhi have sparred over tariffs, intellectual property rights, and market access. While both nations see each other as essential partners in countering China, their economic disagreements have remained unresolved. Trump's outburst, while dramatic, was not entirely baseless. It reflected frustrations that many American policymakers, both Republican and Democrat, have expressed in more diplomatic language. The fear in India is that if Trump were to return to power, such frustrations could once again shape policy in ways that might strain the partnership. In the United States, Trump's flip-flop sparked a familiar pattern of debate. His critics pointed to the reversal as evidence of his inconsistency and lack of strategic thinking, arguing that such unpredictability undermines America's credibility on the world stage. How, they asked, can allies trust U.S. commitments when its leaders swing so wildly between extremes? Supporters, on the other hand, dismissed the inconsistency as irrelevant, arguing instead that Trump's willingness to adapt shows pragmatism. For them, what matters is not the continuity of policy, but the perception that Trump is willing to fight for American interests and recalibrate when necessary. This divide reflects the broader polarization in U.S. politics, where Trump's every move is filtered through the lens of pre-existing loyalties and animosities. One of the most fascinating aspects of the India flip-flop is how it fits into Trump's broader history of foreign policy swings. Throughout his political career, he has oscillated between fierce criticism and unexpected praise of the same countries. NATO, for instance, was once declared obsolete by Trump, only for him later to tout its importance after allies increased defense spending. North Korea's Kim Jong-un was ridiculed as Little Rocket Man before Trump pivoted to proclaiming a personal friendship following their summit meetings. Even China, which Trump vilified as America's greatest economic adversary, occasionally found itself on the receiving end of his admiration for Xi Jinping's leadership style. Seen in this light, the India episode is not an anomaly, but part of a larger pattern in which Trump uses volatility as both a bargaining tactic and a political identity. This pattern, however, carries costs. While Trump's base may see unpredictability as strength, many in the international community interpret it as unreliability. Diplomacy thrives on trust, consistency, and long-term commitments, qualities that Trump's approach often undermines. Allies may question whether agreements reached with him will endure, while adversaries may exploit his inconsistencies to their advantage. In the case of India, the danger is that frequent swings in rhetoric could complicate efforts to build a stable, strategic partnership in the Indo-Pacific, a region already fraught with tensions due to China's assertiveness. Yet, paradoxically, Trump's volatility can also create opportunities. Because he is not bound by traditional diplomatic norms, he is sometimes able to break through stalemates where others have failed. His willingness to meet with Kim Jong-un, for example, though criticized as legitimizing a dictator, nonetheless opened channels of communication that had been dormant for decades. Similarly, his sudden reversals can de-escalate tensions that his own words initially inflamed, allowing him to present himself as the peacemaker after being the provocateur. Domestically in the United States, the India episode also sheds light on how Trump's foreign policy rhetoric intersects with electoral politics. By attacking India on trade, he appeals to working-class voters who feel disadvantaged by globalization. By retreating into praise, he avoids alienating more moderate voters and influential diaspora communities who value the U.S.-India relationship. In effect, the flip-flop allows him to straddle both positions, maximizing his appeal across different constituencies. This balancing act is not accidental. It reflects Trump's keen instinct for political theater, where contradictions are not liabilities, but tools for reaching broader audiences. What remains unclear is how sustainable this strategy is in the long run. While volatility can keep Trump at the center of attention, it also risks eroding the trust that is essential for effective governance and international cooperation. If leaders cannot predict where he will stand from one day to the next, they may hesitate to invest in agreements or commitments that could be reversed overnight. For India, this uncertainty complicates efforts to deepen defense and economic ties with the U.S., as long-term projects require a degree of stability that Trump's style does not always provide.